The dog found it on a Wednesday morning during the first real cold snap of November. Gunnery Sergeant Dane Mercer had been awake since 4, the way he always was. The way 12 years of early reveilles and overseas rotations had wired him past any hope of repair. He was standing in the narrow kitchen of the old Hartwell place off County Road 9, drinking black coffee from a paper cup, watching frost trace slow patterns across the single-pane window above the sink, when Kodiak went still in the hallway. The dog did not growl. He did not bark. He simply stopped walking and stood in place with his head tilted toward the east-facing wall. The fur along the ridge of his back lifted in a clean, precise line from his shoulders to the base of his tail. Dane set down the cup. Kodiak was a German shepherd, 84 pounds of black and tan muscle that had spent 6 years alongside Dane in 3 different theaters. And in all that time, the dog had never been wrong about a thing. His stillness meant something was there. His stillness always meant something was there. Dane crossed the hallway in 6 steps and pressed his palm flat against the dry wall where the dog was looking. The wall was cold, always cold in this house. He tapped with 2 knuckles. It sounded hollow in a way the adjacent sections did not. Not hollow like an empty wall cavity. Hollow in a way that suggested occupation. Something inside, resting against the other side of the board. He did not pull the wall open that morning. He stood there for a long moment with his hand on the plaster, and Kodiak pressed warm against his left thigh, and he told himself it was probably just a rodent problem. And he went back to his coffee, and he did not sleep again that night. If this story holds something in you before we get to what was inside that wall, please subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss what comes next. Dane Mercer was 39 years old. He stood 6 feet 2 in his boots, broad through the chest and narrow through the hips, with a face that had been handsome once and still was, in the way weathered things can be. His hair was dark, with the first threads of gray at the temples, cut short out of habit. He had pale green eyes that seldom blinked when they needed to be taking something in, and a wide jaw he tended to clench when working something out in silence. A scar ran from the outer edge of his left eyebrow to the hinge of his jaw, a thin, pale line from a vehicle incident in a country whose name he rarely said aloud. His hands were large and calloused, scarred at the knuckles from work and years of things with no clean, short explanation. He moved quietly for a man his size. He had the eyes of someone who never truly stopped scanning rooms, roads, exits, or people. He had bought the Hartwell house 6 weeks earlier for $22,000 in a county tax sale. The purchase had not been planned. He had been driving through the area on the way to a job he had already quit in his head, a private security contract in a city he did not want to be in, when he saw the county auction notice posted on a corkboard outside the hardware store in Millhaven, a small town in the river-bottom country of central Tennessee. Something in him had slowed down and turned. He stopped to look at the house on a gray October afternoon, standing in the weeds in the front yard while Kodiak moved in wide, patient circles around the perimeter, and bought it 2 days later before the logic of the thing could talk him out of it. The house was a 2-bedroom frame structure built sometime in the 1950s. White paint long gone to gray and chalk, windows intact but clouded with grime, a front porch that sagged on its right side where a support post had given way. The property ran to half an acre with a rusted garden gate in the back, a collapsed outbuilding that had been a smokehouse once, and a stand of cedar trees along the northern fence line, so old and dense they blocked the road noise entirely. The previous owners had been a family named Hartwell. Beyond that, the neighbors were quiet, and the county clerk had not volunteered information, And Dane had not asked for any. He had Kodiak. He had his duffel bag. He had a truck with 143,000 miles on it, and a toolkit in the bed. He had spent the first 3 weeks pulling rotten drywall from the bathroom, resetting joists under the bedroom floor, and stripping the kitchen to its studs. He worked with the radio off. He worked methodically, early to late. The physical labor was the thing that kept the interior noise manageable, and he had learned that much about himself over the years. Kodiak spent those weeks following him from room to room, settling wherever Dane settled, rising when Dane rose, pressing his large head against Dane's knee when the silences ran long. The dog had been his since Germany, assigned initially and then made permanent through a paperwork chain Dane navigated with his usual tenacity. Kodiak was 8 years old now, technically retired, his muzzle going silver in a way that caught the light on certain mornings and made Dane look away. He moved a little slower than he once had. He still moved before Dane did, every time. The hollow wall stayed hollow for 3 days. On the 4th day, a Saturday, Dane cut a careful incision in the drywall along the north face of the hallway and pulled the section back in one clean piece. Behind it in the cavity between 2 2x4s, resting upright against the old blown-in insulation, as though someone had slid it carefully into place, was a shoebox. Kodiak moved first. He crossed from the kitchen doorway to where Dane crouched, sniffed the shoebox once with focused attention, and then sat back on his haunches and looked at Dane with an expression that conveyed something between patience and expectation. Dane lifted the box out. A women's shoebox, tan cardboard, the lid held by a single rubber band that had dried and cracked. Inside, bound with a strip of kitchen twine, was a bundle of letters. He counted them without opening them. 43 letters. 43 envelopes in the same careful looping cursive, addressed to the same name. Miss Vera Hartwell, 14 County Road 9, Millhaven, Tennessee. No return address on any of them. Every one sealed, every single one unopened. He stood there in the hallway with 43 unread letters in his hands and Kodiak pressed against his leg, and the November wind pushing cold air through the gaps in the east wall, and something in his chest tightened in a way he had not expected. He did not open the letters that day. He set the box on the kitchen counter and stood looking at it for a long time. The handwriting on the envelopes was a man's handwriting, he decided. Deliberate and square in the loops, a slight leftward lean. The postmarks were too faded to read in the kitchen light. He would need daylight and a magnifying glass for that. Kodiak had settled on the floor beneath the counter, head on his forepaws, gaze moving between Dane and the box with the same unhurried attention he gave to everything that mattered. The name on the envelopes was Hartwell. The house had been owned by a family named Hartwell. The math was not complicated, but it raised a question the math could not answer, which was why 43 letters addressed to a woman who had presumably lived in this house had been sealed, bundled, and hidden inside the wall. Why she had never opened them, who had put them there, whether that person was still alive to be found. Dane drove into Millhaven the next morning. It was a Sunday, overcast and still, the kind of gray November sky that sat heavy and low over the river-bottom fields and made everything look like an old photograph. He stopped at the diner because it was open, and because diners in small Tennessee towns were often the fastest route to knowing who had lived where and for how long. He took a booth near the window with Kodiak settled under the table, which the woman behind the counter permitted without comment after looking at the dog. Her name was Carla, according to her apron. Mid-50s. Brown hair going silver at the temples. A round face, quick dark eyes, the efficient posture of someone who had been moving between tables for 30 years. She set his plate down and paused. "You're the one that bought the Hartwell place," she said. He had not introduced himself. "I am," he said. She studied him for a moment. "Vera Hartwell," she said. "You know the name?" "From the tax records," Dane said. He did not mention the letters. "Vera's still here. 81. She's over at Millhaven Gardens, the assisted living place on the highway. Has been for about 4 years now. Her son sold the house to the county when she couldn't keep up the taxes." She paused. Most of us thought that was a shame. The way she said it carried weight beyond the words. "Why's that?" Dane asked. "Because Vera Hartwell is a good woman who raised 4 children in that house and worked that property for 40 years before her health gave out. And her son sold it without asking her first." She picked up the coffee pot. "She doesn't know you bought it. As far as I know, nobody told her." He tipped Carla $20 on a $14 breakfast and drove to Millhaven Gardens on the highway before the sky had finished deciding what kind of day it was going to be. The woman at the front desk was initially uncertain about the dog until Dane explained that Kodiak was a trained support animal, which was close enough to workable. She made a call and came back and said Mrs. Hartwell was having a good morning, that she was in the sunroom, and that visitors were welcome. The sunroom was at the back of the building, a glassed-in addition with potted plants and low chairs and a muted television high on the wall. 3 residents clustered near it. The 4th was alone at a small table near the far window, a book open in her lap and her hands folded on top of it, as though she had stopped reading and had not decided whether to start again. Vera Hartwell was 81 years old, and she had been beautiful once, still was, in the way of faces that have spent a lifetime expressing things honestly. She was small and fine-boned, her white hair pinned neatly back, her eyes a faded blue that held attention without demanding it. She wore a cedar-colored cardigan and pressed dark slacks and held herself with the straight, quiet posture of a woman raised to consider slumping an act of surrender. Her hands were a laborer's hands, knuckled and thick at the joints in a way her fine frame made unexpected. Kodiak moved first. He walked directly to Vera Hartwell at the pace of a dog who had already decided something, not hurrying, not pausing, and stopped at the side of her chair and lowered his head and pressed it gently against her knee. Vera looked down at him. Her hands moved from the book to his head without hesitation, the way a person's hands move toward something they already know how to hold. "Well," she said softly. "Hello." Dane stood 6 feet behind the dog and watched this happen, and felt the pressure in his chest tighten unexpectedly. He crossed the remaining distance and introduced himself and told her he had bought the house on County Road 9. She listened without visible distress, only a kind of measured stillness, the way a person receives news they have been expecting and have made a kind of peace with. "I grew up in that house," she said. Her voice was quiet and precise, a voice that had once carried over a farmyard. "My father built it in 53. I raised my own children there." She paused. "I imagine it needed a good deal of work." "It's coming along," Dane said. "Will you live there?" He had not been certain until she asked. "Yes," he said. Something in her face shifted, barely perceptibly. Not grief. Something closer to relief. "I'm glad," she said. "It's a good house. The bones are good." He came back the following Sunday with the shoebox. He had spent the week turning the question over carefully. 43 sealed letters hidden in her own wall. He had finally held one envelope up to good afternoon light and read the postmark. 1967. He checked 2 more. Both 1967. One from June, one from August. A year of letters, all in the same hand. None of them opened. He brought the shoebox wrapped in a clean dish towel because the cardboard was fragile. Vera was in the sunroom again. Kodiak went to her with the same quiet certainty he had shown the week before, and she put her hand on his head, and her expression held that same mix of warmth and held back weight. He set the box on the table and explained where he had found it. The hollow wall, the careful placement, the cracked rubber band. He did not open it. He slid it toward her and waited. Vera looked at the box for a long time without touching it. "I put them there," she said finally. "I put them there myself." Dane did not speak. "My mother found them first," she said. 1967. I was 18. She found the first one in the mailbox, brought it inside, and told me I was never to read it or respond, and she burned it in the kitchen stove. She looked at the box, not at Dane. I had already gotten 12 of them by then. 4 months of hiding them. I put them all together and put them in the wall because it was the only place in the house she would not look. She paused. I never opened them after that. I was afraid of what would happen if I did. Dane waited. I was afraid that if I read them I would leave, she said, simply and without self-pity. And I was not ready to leave. And then the years went on. And I was not ready in different ways, and eventually I think I was afraid of what it would mean that I had never left. She finally touched the edge of the box. A waste of a life, I thought. A woman's life arranged around an absence. I didn't want to find out that was what mine was. She looked at Dane then, directly, the faded blue eyes careful and clear. Who wrote them? Dane asked. She said the name. James Colton. She said it the way you say a name you have said every day inside your head for 60 years and almost never aloud, with a particular kind of care, setting it down gently only when the distance is done. James Colton had been the son of a neighboring property owner, 3 years older than Vera, a young man she had known since childhood who, in the summer of her 17th year, had become something different. Her mother had not approved. That was a gentle way to describe it. Her mother had deployed every tool available to a woman of her generation to end the thing, and she had succeeded. Vera had not left. James had gone away, and Vera had married another man at 22 named Harold Hartwell. They had spent 31 years together before Harold died of heart failure in 1999. A good husband. She said this without qualification, with the measured warmth you extend to someone faithful across a long span of time. James Colton had died in 2011. Vera knew this because she had looked eventually when it seemed safe to look, which told Dane something about the particular shape of her grief. "Do you want to read them now?" Dane asked. Vera's hands rested on the box. The November sky had gone from gray to the pewter shade that precedes early dark, and the garden outside was bare and still. "I think I've been waiting a long time to want that," she said. He left her alone with the letters. He took Kodiak out to the parking lot and sat on the tailgate of the truck in the cold and looked at the sky and did not try to name what he was feeling. Something adjacent to grief, something adjacent to recognition, something else he did not have a word for yet. He drove back to the house on County Road 9 and built a fire in the fireplace he had cleared and relined the week before, and he sat beside it with Kodiak against his left side, and he thought about 43 letters sealed for nearly 60 years inside a wall and a woman who had put them there herself because she had been too afraid to let herself be changed by them. He did not think it was only her story. That was the thing that stayed with him as the fire worked through the cedar logs and the room filled with the sharp, clean smell of it. Carla from the diner called him on Thursday. He did not ask how she got his number. She told him Vera had been asking about him and left a pause after for it to land. He went to Millhaven Gardens the next morning instead of waiting until Sunday. Vera was in a different room, a small sitting area near the library cart. The shoebox was on the table beside her tea. The letters were no longer in it. They were sorted in a small stack, some in their envelopes, some folded open. She had been reading them again. He could see it in her face, the way a face looks when it has been carrying an emotion all morning. Kodiak walked to her and settled beside her chair without being invited, which he had not done with anyone in 4 years except Dane. "He trusts you," Dane said. "That's a gift," Vera said. She looked at the dog. "He's a good judge, I think." "The best I've ever known," Dane said. She looked up. "Sit down, please." She poured him tea without asking whether he wanted it, which he appreciated. "James wrote 43 letters," she said. June of 67 through January of 68, 7 months every week. Then he stopped. She smoothed the edge of one envelope with her thumb. "He writes in the last one that he has accepted a position in Memphis. He says he will not write again after this one. He says he hopes she is well." She caught herself. "That he hopes I'm well. That's all." She was quiet a moment. "He was very decent about it. That's what I wasn't prepared for. How decent he was about all of it." Dane said nothing. "He married a woman named Patricia in 1970, she continued. They had 3 daughters. He retired in Tennessee. Maynard County. That's 40 miles from here." She looked at Dane. He came back. The room felt smaller and warmer. "One of the daughters still lives in Maynard County," Vera said. She looked at her hands. "I don't know if she knows about me. I don't know if her father ever spoke of this." She paused. "I only know that for 7 months in 1967, a young man wrote me letters I didn't read and thought of me often enough to write weekly and was decent enough to stop when stopping was the decent thing." Dane asked, "What do you want to do with that?" She was quiet for a moment. "I want to know if she knows," Vera said. "His daughter? I want to know if there are letters on the other side. If he kept anything." She looked at her hands. "I'm not asking you to find this out. I'm only telling you what I want. 81-year-old women are allowed to say what they want. That's one of the few advantages." He drove to Maynard County on Saturday. He had looked up the name the night before, found the obituary from 2011, which named a surviving daughter as June Colton Marsh in the town of Farrell, the county seat. He had the address from property records in 20 minutes. He had no authority to do any of what he was doing. He was a man with a retired military dog and a house he was renovating and a shoebox that had turned out to be a 60-year-old wound. He went anyway. Farrell was about the size of Millhaven, set back from the river with a grain elevator visible from the highway. June Colton Marsh lived in a white house on a side street, 2 blocks from the library, with a porch swing and dormant flower beds and a truck in the driveway with cardboard boxes visible through the rear window. Kodiak was alert in the back seat. Not tense, alert. Ears forward, watching the house with focused interest, the way he watched things he was curious about rather than wary of. The woman who answered the door was perhaps 50, compact and straight-backed, with dark hair cut short and her father's eyes, which Dane could only know from the single photograph in the obituary, but was nonetheless certain about. She had a tape dispenser in one hand and a distracted look that sharpened when she saw the dog. Kodiak did not move forward. He stood at Dane's left shoulder and looked at the woman with steady, quiet attention, the way he looked at people he had decided to wait on. Her name was June Marsh, and she was 49 years old, and she had been going through her father's things for 8 months since her sister decided it was finally time to clear the house in Maynard County, where James had lived alone since Patricia's death. She told Dane all of this in the doorway, in the way of people who have been alone with a large project for a long time and are grateful for an interruption. He told her why he was there. She stood very still. "You found letters he wrote to a woman in Millhaven," she said. "Letters she never read," Dane said. "Hidden in the wall of the house, 43 letters from the summer of '67 through January '68. June looked past him at the yard for a moment. Kodiak moved then, one step forward, and sat between Dane and the door with the quiet, deliberate presence of a dog that has made a decision. June looked at the dog. She breathed out slowly. "He kept a box," she said. "I found it about 3 weeks ago. Letters. Returns. Unsent ones, I thought. I didn't fully understand." She looked at Dane. "Come in." The house was warm and smelled of old paper and cedar, boxes stacked along the baseboards. Framed photographs leaned against the wall. Kodiak moved through the room methodically, and then returned to settle beside Dane's feet. June made coffee and told Dane about her father. James Colton had been a quiet man, precise and deliberate, an engineer's mind. He had loved Patricia, been a good father, lived a life that was mostly content. But there was a thing, she said, a held quality. A part of him very still and private in a way that was not unhappiness exactly, but was not complete ease either. She went to a room at the back and came back with a cardboard box, larger than Vera's. She set it on the table. Inside, bundled with a rubber band still intact, was a stack of letters in a woman's handwriting, looping and careful, the same hand Dane had seen on the envelopes in the wall. "He kept them," Dane said. "He kept them," June said. "She sent them," Dane said. He felt the pieces settling into place with the particular weight of things that have been suspended for a long time and are only now landing. 41 of them, June said. She sat down. She wrote back. Her mother never knew. She sent them to his family's address, and then she stopped. And then he wrote the last letter, and then he stopped too. 43 from him, 41 from her. Vera's letters had been sent. James's had not been delivered. The mother had intercepted enough incoming letters to frighten Vera into silence, and Vera had hidden the ones that got through and stopped writing, not knowing that 41 letters she had sent were sitting in a box 3 counties away, kept for 50 years by a man who had never thrown a single one away. Dane sat at June Marsh's kitchen table, with Kodiak pressed against his knee, and felt the weight of all that time settle in the room around him. He did not tell June about Vera yet. He said there was something he needed to speak to Vera about first, and June looked at him with a precise, searching expression that reminded him again of her father's photograph, and she nodded and wrote her number on the back of an envelope and told him to call when it was time. He drove back in the early afternoon, the sky lowering toward dark, the bare fields passing on both sides, and Kodiak asleep in the back seat for the first time in days. He went to Millhaven Gardens the next morning. Vera was in the sunroom. She looked up when he came in, and the look on her face when she saw Kodiak ahead of him was the same as always, the same opening, the same held warmth. He sat across from her and told her about June Marsh. He told her about the box of letters. He told her that James Colton had received 41 letters from her and had kept every single one for the rest of his life. Vera was very still. "He kept them," she said. The same words, the same tone he had used, which told him something about what the information did to a person. "In a cardboard box," Dane said. "In a house in Maynard County?" Vera looked at the window. The garden was bare, and the sky was the deep, flat gray of a late November morning about to give way to something. I thought, she said slowly, that I had been foolish, that the feeling had been on my side only. She paused. My mother told me that. She told me a young man who felt something real did not let a woman's mother stop him. She paused again. She was wrong. Dane did not say anything. She wasn't a cruel woman, Vera said. She was a frightened one. Those are different, but they can look the same from where you're standing. She breathed in. She's been gone 30 years. I've had a long time to understand it. Do you want to meet her? Dane asked. His daughter, June. Vera looked at him, the faded blue eyes careful and clear. I think that would depend, she said carefully, on whether she has any reason to be angry with me. I don't think she does, Dane said. You'd know, Vera said, looking at Kodiak. He'd know first, and then you would. He called June Marsh that afternoon from the parking lot. She answered on the second ring. He told her about Vera, all of it, and the silence on the other end was long and full of things he could hear even without words. When she spoke, her voice was steady and quiet, and she said she thought they should meet. He arranged it for the following Sunday. He drove to Millhaven Gardens at 10 in the morning, and June was already there in the lobby, the cardboard box of letters under her arm, her jacket buttoned against the cold. She looked at Dane when he came through the door, and then she looked at Kodiak, and her expression did something brief and complicated, and then smoothed. Dane led them back to the sunroom. Vera was there. She had dressed carefully. The cedar-colored cardigan again, pressed slacks, her white hair pinned with an attention that indicated the morning had not been careless. She sat very straight. Kodiak walked to her as he always did, ahead of everything, and settled beside her chair, and Vera's hand found his head. She looked up at June Marsh across the room. June stood just inside the doorway holding the box. She was looking at Vera with the expression of a person who has been trying to understand something about their father for a long time, and has just arrived at the room where the understanding is going to happen. Mrs. Hartwell, she said. My name is Vera, Vera said. June crossed the room and set the box on the table between them and sat down. Dane moved to the far side of the room and stood near the window and let the two women have the table. What followed lasted nearly 2 hours. He heard pieces of it. He heard June say her father had spoken of Tennessee with a quality she had noticed and never understood. He heard Vera say she had driven past the Colton property 100 times in 60 years and never once let herself stop. He heard June say her father had lived long enough to know his grandchildren. He heard Vera say that was a blessing, and her voice, when she said it, was plain and true. He did not hear the moment when one of them cried, but he knew when it happened, because Kodiak moved from the window to the table, without being called, and pressed himself against both women's knees simultaneously in a way that should not have been geometrically possible, and managed it anyway. He took Kodiak outside after that and stood in the cold parking lot and breathed the sharp November air and felt the particular lightness that follows a long-held weight being set down somewhere permanent. They drove back to the house on County Road 9 in the early afternoon. The sun had appeared for the first time in a week, low and pale, washing the cedar trees along the fence line in a thin gold that made everything look more permanent than it had before. Kodiak was asleep in the back seat. Dane drove with the window cracked and the cold air moving across his face, and something in him that had been pointed forward for 12 years seemed, for the first time, to hesitate. He had been a man who moved, from base to base, deployment to deployment, contract to contract, and when the contracts stopped making sense, he had moved differently, but still moved, driving the long roads between places that were only places. He had told himself the movement was the work and the work was the point. He had believed this in the way you believe a thing that is useful, even when you know it is not entirely true. He had bought the house on County Road 9 on an impulse he could not name. He was 39 days into the renovation. He had Carla, who left messages about coffee. He had Vera Hartwell, who knew the things worth knowing about a person and a house. He had a dog who had known all of it before he had, and made his decisions accordingly. He pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment with the engine off. The house was gray in the afternoon light, still in need of work. The porch temporarily shimmed on the right side. The cedar trees were dark and dense along the north fence. The smokehouse ruins, patient, and collapsed at the back of the lot. Kodiak was awake, watching the house the way he sometimes watched things he had already decided about. Dane got out of the truck. In the weeks that followed, the work went on. He finished the kitchen and reframed the porch and replaced the support post with a pressure-treated column set in fresh concrete, and the sagging stopped and the porch leveled. He replaced the east wall of the hallway entirely, new drywall over new insulation, and ran his hand along the finished surface before painting it the same off-white as the rest of the hall. There was no shoebox now. The wall was solid, but the space felt different for having held what it had held, and he did not think that was sentiment. He thought it was the way rooms absorbed the things that happened in them. Vera asked to see the house in early December. He drove to Millhaven Gardens on a Thursday and brought her out in the truck, and she walked through every room slowly, running her hands along the door frames, standing for a long moment in the kitchen at the window above the sink. In the hallway, she stopped at the east wall and put her palm against the freshly painted drywall, and stood like that. And Kodiak pressed against her side, and she said quietly, "Thank you for taking care of it." He thought she meant the wall. He was not entirely sure she did not also mean something else. Carla organized a supper in the third week of December. She announced it at the diner counter one morning with the matter-of-fact certainty of a woman who organized things in Millhaven and did not bother with formality when intention was sufficient. She said there were people who wanted to meet the man who had bought the Hartwell place and done right by it. Dane said yes because saying no to Carla required more energy than he had available. The supper was at Carla's house, a wide ranch on the eastern edge of town, warm and loud in the way of houses used to filling with people. 14 people around the table, and the card tables extended off the end. Farmers and shopkeepers and a retired schoolteacher named George who had taught most of the room. A man named Purcell who had served in the Army in the early 90s and who found Dane across the room with the particular radar veterans have for one another and appeared at his elbow within 10 minutes. Vera was there. June Marsh had driven from Farrellfort, which made Vera smile in a way Dane had not seen from her before, a genuine and unguarded smile that took up the whole face. Kodiak spent the evening moving between Vera's chair and Dane's, eventually settling between the two of them in the narrow space, as though the arrangement were obvious. There was a moment late in the evening when the table had gone quieter, the dessert finished and the coffee going. Vera was talking to George about something Dane couldn't hear. Carla was in the kitchen. Purcell was telling a story about a vehicle incident that kept almost making Dane laugh. Outside, the first hard snow of December was coming down over Millhaven. The windows of Carla's house, gold squares of warmth against the white dark, the cedars smell of the fire everywhere. Dane looked across the room at Vera and found that she was already looking at him. She held his gaze for a moment with the clear, patient attention she brought to everything. And then she looked down at Kodiak between their chairs, and she said something he had to read on her lips across the table noise. He thought she said, "He knows." He looked at Kodiak. The dog was looking up at him with the settled, certain steadiness of a creature who had already arranged the room the way it needed to be arranged and was waiting for the human to notice. Dane looked at the warm windows and the snow beyond them, and the people around the table, and the house on County Road 9, waiting down the road with its new wall and its level porch and its cedar trees standing solid against the north wind, and he felt the thing he had been keeping at a careful distance for 12 years arrive without ceremony and take up residence somewhere behind his sternum. He was staying. He had not said it yet. He would. He had been moving toward it since the moment Kodiak went still in the hallway on a Wednesday morning in November and stood with his head tilted toward a hollow wall, waiting for the human to understand what the dog already knew. Through all the bases and the rotations and the contracts and the long roads, moving toward it the whole time from the other direction, June Marsh came up beside him at the end of the evening while people were finding their coats. She had the box of her father's letters under her arm. She had brought them for Vera, and Vera had given them back, apparently, saying she thought June should keep them. "Thank you," June said, "for what you did." He thought about what he had done, which was find a box in a wall and knock on a door and drive 40 miles on a Saturday and arrange for 2 women to sit at a table together. It did not seem like much. June shook her head. "You know what it is," she said. "When somebody finds a thing that was lost and takes the trouble to return it." He waited. "It's an argument," she said, "against the idea that things only get more lost over time." She looked down at Kodiak. "He knows what you did." She said good night and went to find Vera. Outside, the snow was steady and soft, coating the driveway and the yard and the road beyond, and Millhaven was quiet under it, the rooftops white and the windows warm. He drove home. Kodiak was awake in the back seat, watching the snow come through the headlights. He pulled into the driveway and sat with the engine ticking in the cold. The house was dark. He had not left a light on. He would, going forward. He would leave a light on because it was his house, and it was right for a house to have a light in the window. He got out of the truck. Kodiak came around the cab and stood beside him, close, warm against his leg in the cold, and they both stood in the driveway while the snow came down and the cedar trees were dark shapes along the fence line, and the house waited, patient and solid, in front of them. He had patched a wall and found a wound and taken it back to the person it belonged to. He had watched a man's life close the distance between it and a woman's grief, decades after both had been told the distance was permanent. He had eaten at a table with 14 people who had decided, in the way good communities decide things, that they were going to know him. He had a dog who had known all of it from the beginning, from the first morning in a cold hallway, from the first time he walked to Vera Hartwell without being directed and pressed his head against her knee. Dane Mercer put his hand on Kodiak's back and felt the steady warmth of him there in the snow, and he looked at the house, and something in him, for the first time in a very long time, was not looking past it toward the road. Finally, home. There are things in this life that do not announce themselves. They wait, patient and sealed, inside old walls, inside cardboard boxes, inside the ordinary days we move through on our way to somewhere else. And sometimes it takes a dog's instinct, or a stranger's knock, or a Sunday morning that turns out to be nothing like you planned, for the thing that was waiting to finally be found. If you have ever kept something hidden because you were afraid reading it would change you, or if you have ever moved so fast and so far that home became a word without a place to land, then you know what this story is about. And if you are still here, then you also know that it is never too late for the found thing to matter. It is never too late for the wall to come down. May God bless you and keep you and your family close. May the things you have sealed find their way home.